Okay, so now it's time for the reviews for seasons 5, 6, and 7 of Weeds. Now, season 5 definitely starts up with momentum, but it quickly loses it. You'd think that the high stakes of this huge drug cartel and Nancy being implicated with both the leader of this whole operation, but also this huge political figure from Mexico. And the situations, yes, are more high intensity than previous seasons. It's just not as well formulated. And also, some of the characters just start to get more basic and kind of less interesting, because at the end of season 4, Shane starts to turn into this, bad kid and loses his sense of strong conviction. Definitely one of the most interesting characters for what I'll talk about for the end of season 5. But, you have season 3 with him, Judah's ghost, talking to him, and this is probably where he gets more interesting. And when they decided to bring him down that road, they definitely did it well, which is something I have to say, is like, they take these paths that I just don't like to see them go down, but they make it work for most of the time. And as I had said, seasons 4, 5, and 6 just feel like this transitionary phase that does not end. And it's just a mixture of these characters that I really hate, but I like their characters because I hate them for what they do, but yeah, they're still pretty cool. Like Cesar, he's just kind of this funny character, but also really scary and dangerous. And then there's the dirty Mexican guy. Wow, that sounded so terrible. That sounded like such a stereotype, but I mean, like, he was notorious in the show for just being smelly, and Nancy wanted to take a shower. That part, I kind of forget his name. Anyway, so, like, it's just what's going on. And season 4 does also have that same kind of unexpected cliffhanger Weeds ending, and it picks up fairly well from season 5. As I said, it begins with momentum, but it just doesn't know where to take these things anymore, and that is my biggest problem with, seasons 5, 6, 7, and 8, is that it has these great setups, but it just doesn't know where to take them, and then it feels like it changes its mind really quickly, and then just dumps this and moves on, especially season 8. And then here there are times where they just drag on things, but it's just not working at all. Like, season 4 has Celia being captured by Quinn, who was just not even mentioned, barely mentioned since the first episode of the first season, which happened with, Justin Chatwin or something like that. The kid from the first episode who you'd think would be that big character who, deals, and Nancy's like, oh, and he's gay and that stuff. Like, he's mentioned maybe 1 or 2 times again by Doug, and that's about it, and he's just, there's nothing else. And the same thing with Quinn, except for Quinn, when she comes back, I was like, okay, maybe there'll be some cathartic thing here, but no, it's just she's trying to extort money, and you basically take Celia hostage with this Mexican revolutionary, which I think is cool, ridiculous, extremely ridiculous, but cool. And the show does a lot of things like that. But it kind of works for this themes of seasons 4 through 6, because it is just basically these people who pretend to be something they're not. And Esteban, who has this very roundabout logic about, he basically is the head of this drug organization because he acquires money from it, which he uses in his political power, because he's like, as a politician, I truly want to help, the people of Mexico, and he's saying, like, in order to build schools and homeless shelters and really help these people, I need this money that I can only ascertain from the drug business, which is something that inherently floods Mexico with much, much more crime and gangs and violence. So it definitely does a good job of making these situations that are critiques and these social situations, if you will, that are very, very intriguing parts of these seasons. It doesn't really act on them. It doesn't go. It shouldn't be obvious or blunt, but it sometimes just doesn't take the lead. As I'm saying, like, the recurrent problematic motif here is that it does not flesh things out very well. Also with Guillermo is one of those characters that I found funny in season 3. I really would have liked to see the end of season 3, right when they start to make these plans with Celia in on the business and Guillermo with the protection. I just would have loved to see that fleshed out, but it also ended season 3 so perfectly. And then I just slowly grow to hate him, and I like the way that Nancy goes after him, and then she comes back, and she seems to just cut a lot of moral corners at times, and then at other times make these stands, and there are some problems with the continuity of characters. Moving toward the end of Season 5, we have Shane basically starting to get pretty weird, and then, oh, look what happens. He kills Pilar, and Pilar, she's trying to basically throw Nancy in the back after she has the baby, and she doesn't really like her, and she basically threatens the family, and Nancy's just doing all of her little tricks to get out of it, and then Shane kills her with he couldn't find a golf club. It was the croquet thing in the pool, and I thought that was such a great ending. I mean, not as well set up in editing and just build up as previous seasons, but still just fantastic. Really kind of adds a little more to the series. And then Season 6 basically picks up shot for shot in the same way, and it all of a sudden just has Shane just being this really not maniacal but just very intriguing character, as I said, and he isn't fleshed out. It's just the problem is when Season 6 picks up and they're finally leaving the whole situation, which they keep mentioning again, and then Lupita was back for a while, but now she's gone again, and that's cool because Lupita's cool. I'm so happy they were finally just going on the road, because it just didn't feel right, and as soon as they picked up and when it started to feel like it was gonna keep going again, and Andy's love interest, because I'm forgetting her name, she's just kind of swept aside again. And so, yeah, they're on the road, and it takes a couple episodes where they're just kind of aimlessly doing nothing and just exploring some of the character decisions as of recently in the show. And then I feel like about halfway, a little before halfway of Season 6, it gets really good again. It felt like classic Weeds, just the camaraderie of these characters, and it just felt really good for a while, and there's a fucking fly around here, and I just want to punch my balls off. That seemed like an irrational reaction, but flies just they're so just... Anyway, while it also has these things that, as I said, are increasingly more common towards the end of the show, are these episodal importance things where they'll bring up something you think, and you know it's not going to last, but it just never has any lasting influence in the show. And it's fine to have things that just create interest for a single episode and then having the overarching story, but it's just so many things where it's like, alright, we're going to set up here, then we're going to do this, and then but now we're over here, and I don't know how they ever get anything accomplished, because it never feels like they're at any place long enough. When they go to the hotel or at the trailer park, and I don't think they're really cool, and they did them well, because these characters just inhabit these situations, you know, Andy, and they create these new characters that just great interactions, good dialogue, cool situation, interesting, new, always have something new, but they just eventually just become completely irrelevant, which is okay because in the grand scheme of things change. But there's just no... It just gets to the point where it's just so repetitious in its inconsistency that there's just nothing to build off of, and you lose... While they have these themes, you lose this sense of momentum. So something I want to bring up, which is just never, I don't even, if you've heard this mentioned on some Showtime news or website or one of the actors, just let me know if anybody mentioned this. So at the end of Season 5, you have this setup of basically these secondary cast of characters, which is Dean, Celia, who, I mean, they used to be more primary, but now they're just kind of pushed to the back to make the show more lighthearted at times and have just a better opportunity for the comedy. And I do love those characters, so I imagine the writers wanted to keep them in there somehow. They just start to feel more and more relevant, which kind of sucks, but I still liked having them in there, because they're awesome. But you have Celia, who's still just a major bitch, and even more strengthened in her bitchiness now. Dean and Doug, and even like Isabel, and they're like, alright, we're gonna start our own operation here, we're gonna deal, and like, this is what we're gonna do. And it sounded like cool, it sounded pretty obvious, like they were still trying to make weed itself like a relevant part of the show, because weed dealing just became, and I'm fine with that, because they did move on to more ambitious things, but I mean, I think they were trying to hold on to that a little bit, and Silas keeps it up. I think, is this when they set up the medicinal store? Because that was just, you know, that whole Celia operation where she's dealing, and she basically, I think she even dresses up like Nancy, and she'd like to see where that was going. After after season 5, there is no mention of it. Season 7, we meet up with Halia and Dean again, so that was something I was so excited when I saw that. I think there are 2 or 3 episodes maybe, but I still found that fantastic. And Dee mentions like, "Oh, don't tell me Celia's with you," or but they don't mention anything, and I felt like they could have just thrown something out. And season 8, going back to Regrestic episode, but nothing about Celia, anything about them, which is really disappointing. So yeah, season 6, and it starts to build up tension again towards the end, as you know it would. And then one of the coolest well, actually it's pretty much a guest star at that point. Richard Dreyfuss, yes, he comes back to play Nancy's teacher, who she kind of had like this implied sexual relationship with. That was a little iffy. And they have the twist about Silas's dad. Oh wait, it's not Judah Botwin. It's actually this retarded, this kind of not very smart jock blonde guy. And I never really figured out if I liked that or not, and has this culminating effect where you don't know if Silas is gonna join up with them going off to Denmark, which is another thing that was cool. And then yeah, so Esteban's coming with Cesar, and they're at the airport, and they got Stevie or whatever, they have all the fake names, kind of forget what they are. And, you know, still kind of crazy Shane and Andy. And yeah, so the big reveal is that they've been talking about this Plan C, or I think that's what it was called. And basically they call the cops, the feds, the DEA, whatever, on Nancy. She turns herself in. She's been questioning for a very long time, basically saving her from getting killed by Esteban, and I just really hated him at that point. So okay, season 7. Season 7 starts up, and that was a pretty awesome season 6 finale. 3 years later, big ellipsis, and as I said, I don't like inter-season ellipsis, but yet again, it would have been kind of boring just watching Nancy go through the process. But it's just a weird thing when you begin a show that's basically been continuous for so long, and then all of a sudden, it's 3 years later, Nancy's in jail, they're all in Denmark, and there's just so much you don't know about, and I really hated the beginning of season 7. And I know a lot of people don't really like season 7, but there comes a point where they just, about halfway through again, where they start to drop most connection with the beginning of season 7. Nancy's on parole. The New York setting, it was an interesting change up, and it is a completely different style than any of the other seasons, but I eventually like where it winds up. Shane doing the cop thing, and then they start up the new business, and then she gets the job with the capitalist douchebags, and Doug, and back in there. And yet again, beginning of really great things, some really crappy things that are just not at all very well done. But, you know, that's the nature of the show. And season 7 has a fantastic finale for anybody that knows. And it starts, and I was happy to see, you know, they're kind of back in the suburban lifestyle, which I did like New York. And I forgot to mention, like, back in season 5, they introduce Jill, who was always mentioned, but never actually there. And then the actual finale with the gunshot really took me by surprise, because I was happy. I was like, oh, it's so nice. They're kind of just learning to operate as a family, and I'm really excited for, the next season, if it gets there, because they'll be able to build from here fairly well. And then, oh, boom, sniper. And it took me a while, and I started to guess at different people, and yeah, we'll talk about that for season 8. But I basically, to summarize these seasons, the thing that I've been talking about is that the show has these, it never ceases to be an enjoyable show, that it doesn't ever get rock bottom bad, but it makes these decisions that I question as a viewer. They make it work, and that's what's really important at the end of the day. It does prevented these seasons from being truly amazing, but they're still good seasons. So for these seasons, I do admire their ambition for the places they want to go and the things they want to do and the high and bigger stakes, always changing it up and always keeping it different. But unfortunately, it just does not plan well enough. There are times where I legitimately just don't think the writers are thinking things through. Especially as something I had mentioned in the last review, is the dates of what's going on. So while some seasons pretty much pick up where the others have left off, and then have this unspecified amount of time throughout the season, not necessarily every season counts as a year. But there is that 3-year ellipsis in between seasons 6 and 7. And there's even that chunk of time removed from season 5 to draw from the context of the show. Season 2, when Shane is graduating, there's this cake in his like class of 2006, and the show was actually, you know, that season was 2006. So I'm not necessarily saying season 1 had to be 2005 because that's what the year of the show dictates. There are some contextual things, but necessarily it is possible for the first and second, maybe even third season to exist in 2006. But later on, in season 8, there is one or two mentions of the fact that it is the year 2012. I think in the first episode, someone asked her if they know what just for, you know, brain cognitive recognition, they're like, do you know what year it is after she'd been shot? And she's like, oh, year of the apocalypse, which would imply 2012, and I know they mention it at some point later. So, if we are to assume that 3-year gap, we'd have to also condense so many seasons into a very short span of time so that it's possible for there to be, it would have to be 2009 in season 6 for season 7, or at least, well, it's 2008 or 2009, so that season 7 could be in 2011, and then, or 2012, and then season 8's pretty much definitely in 2012. And I know this is really nitpicky, and I don't really care. It doesn't affect my care for the show at all. I just want to know if anybody had any answers for that, because I noticed that, because I one day noticed that, and then went back, and I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of doesn't make sense. I don't know if anybody's addressed that. Seems kind of obvious, but who knows. Anyway, not the point of this. Let me know what your thoughts are on the lesser seasons of Weeds. Maybe you think they're better. I'd love to hear an argument for someone who thinks they're better. I'd be interested